Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just share some housekeeping. Please mute your mic, and there will also be a question and comment session. Please use the chat and raise hand option during this session. To all our dear attendees, welcome to the Department of Chemical Engineering seminar on suggested energy transition policy for Trinidad and Tobago, the next 50 years, and new programs, proposals for the Petroleum Studies Unit, Department of Chemical Engineering. I am Rafi Hussein, head of the Department of Chemical Engineering. Words and phrases such as renewable energy and sustainable and hydrogen energy, energy efficiency, carbon capture, utilization and storage, or CCUS, and net zero carbon, climate change, wind, solar, geothermal and hydropower energy, green hydrogen, green ammonia, and green methanol are being mentioned in almost every forum as the world gradually transitions from fossil energy. Our speakers on suggested energy transition policy for Trinidad and Tobago and the next 50 years are Professor of Practice Andrew Jupiter and Dr. Pedro Van Meers. Professor Andrew Jupiter has been associated with the energy industry for the last 50 years, commencing from 1971 as an employee of Shell Trinidad Limited. Professor Andrew Jupiter is the coordinator of the Petroleum Studies Unit and directly oversees the MSc Petroleum Engineering and MSc and Postgraduate Diploma in Petroleum Engineering and Management programs at the University of the West Indies. Professor Andrew Jupiter received a BSc in Natural Sciences and a postgraduate diploma in Petroleum Engineering from the UWI, and also holds a Master's of Engineering degree in Mineral Engineering Management from the Pennsylvania State University. He was the recipient of the Shakonia Gold in 2016 for public service. He was appointed as Distinguished Fellow in 2013 and Professor of Practice by the UWI. He is the holder of the Methanol Holdings Trinidad Limited MHTL Dennis Patrick Chair in Petroleum Engineering. Professor Andrew Jupiter was the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Trinidad and Tobago from 1998 to 2004. He was also President of National Energy Corporation of Trinidad and Tobago Limited from 2009 to 2012 and has held the position of Director on various state boards. He was one of 50 public servants to be honored at the Outstanding Public Service Award Ceremony and Gala by the Government of Trinidad and Tobago for the country's golden 50th year anniversary of independence. He is a member of the Society of Petroleum Engineers, Fellow of the Energy Institute, Fellow of the Institute of Materials, Minerals and Mining, and a member of the Association of International Petroleum Negotiators. Professor Andrew Jupiter is married to Dr. Clarice Macmillan Jupiter. Dr. Pedro Van Meers received his PhD cum laude from the State University of Utrecht in 1970. From 1970 to 1973, he was Chief of the International Petroleum Development Division, Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, Federal Government of Canada. Since 1974, Dr. Van Meers and Van Meers Energy have published petroleum consulting services to governments of 90 different jurisdictions, including Alaska, Alberta, Bangladesh, Bolivia, the Canadian Western Arctic, China, Gabon, Guatemala, Kuwait, Mexico, Newfoundland, Oman, Pakistan, Peru, Russia, Thailand, and Trinidad and Tobago. Dr. Van Meers is currently lead advisor on the Nigerian Petroleum Industry Bill VME has the largest and most comprehensive world petroleum fiscal comparative analysis database consisting of 780 fiscal systems in 169 countries and territories, featuring extensive sensitivity analysis capabilities on field size, cost, and prices. During the last 40 years, Dr. Van Meers has provided highly regarded courses in fiscal systems various times per year for 20 to 40 participants per course on an open access basis, currently through London Petro Academy in London, UK, as well as on an in-house basis for governments and companies during the COVID epidemic. The courses are provided on a virtual basis. Dr. Van Meers has assisted as experts witness for government and companies in 9 arbitration cases. Attendees, please join me in welcoming Professor Andrew Jupiter and Dr. Pedro Van Meers to our virtual platform and to deliver their suggested energy transition policy for Trinidad and Tobago the next 50 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dean of Faculty of Engineering, University of the West Indies, heads of department of UWI, captains of industry, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, and thanks for joining us today. This document, Suggested Energy Transition Policy for Trinidad and Tobago in the next 50 years, is meant to be an initial contribution to a discussion on this important topic by the authors. Dr. Pedro Van Meers will be joining us later, and I have been associated with the energy industry for the last 50 years, and we wish to celebrate. One of the ways of celebrating is to look at the next 50 years. May I say that we have prepared this report on our own initiative and are not financed or sponsored by any party. A wide variety of entities and companies have made forecasts and possible scenarios for the next 20 or 30 years with respect to world energy development. For the purposes of this report, the estimates of the International Energy Agency will be used. They published recently a remarkable report called Net Zero by 2050, a roadmap for the global energy sector. This report describes a scenario how the world can reach a condition of net zero by 2050. This report is radically different from the usual IEA stated policy scenario, which is the forecast based on the current policies of the various countries. It is recognized that a worldwide strategy to combat climate change will impact very negatively on nations such as Trinidad and Tobago. The overall transition process should be based on placing the nations in the strongest possible economic position once the world achieves net zero carbon conditions. Net zero is defined as whatever emissions take place in 2050 will be offset by carbon capture and storage or other methods. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it is crucial that an optimal policy is defined and implemented to lead the country through the energy transition over the next 4 decades to ensure the well-being and wealth of generations. So far, such a policy has not been developed, although the country has committed to its contribution under the Paris Agreement, despite the government's various established strategies and plans with respect to oil and gas, renewable energy, and power generation. This seminar is meant to be an initial contribution to a discussion on suggested energy transition policy for Trinidad and Tobago the next 50 years. We will take a journey through this evening by the following: international framework, oil and gas resources, physical terms for oil and gas, renewable energy resources, restructuring of the power sector, restructuring of the other sectors, for example, electric vehicles, electric planes and taxis, ferries based on renewables, gas-based industries and LNG exports, refining. Talk a little bit about carbon taxes, possible new industries like green hydrogen, green ammonia, green methanol, direct air capture of carbon dioxide, green synthetic fuels. Take a look at overall economic forecasts, population, economic growth. Then a summary of energy transition policies and an energy transition timetable and what if scenario. International framework. The suggested energy transition policy utilizes estimates from 2 International Energy Agency reports, STEPS and the Net Zero by 2050 roadmap. For the purposes of setting a transition policy in Trinidad and Tobago, the authors have assumed that the world will achieve net zero objectives approximately halfway between STEPS and the roadmap by 2050. For this presentation, net zero is defined as whatever emissions take place in 2050 will be offset by carbon capture and storage or other methods. STEPS and the roadmap. The middle ground is this policy. Oil demand, we have estimated that 64 million barrels of oil per day by 2050, midway between STEPS and the roadmap. Gas demand, 130 TCF per year by 2050. Carbon dioxide emissions will be 29 gigatons of carbon dioxide by 2050. Global temperature, 2.4 degrees centigrade by 2100. Global net zero commitment context. Nations representing 70% of the world GDP have committed to achieving net zero carbon by 2050 or 2060. Russia, India, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and most developing countries have not made any such commitments. Global oversupply of oil resulting from opportunistic production in non-OPEC countries will place a downward price on price. And so oil price in 2050 is expected to be in the range of US $30 to $40 per barrel in constant 2021 dollars. The intense competition for investment among non-OPEC countries during the next 3 decades will result in a lowering of the government take from the current world average of 60% to between 40% to 50% by 2050. I now move to solar and wind energy, the international trends that will impact TNT's energy transition. Production costs decline with advances in technology and scale up of industrial production. Solar, the lowest cost solar power purchase agreement this year was in Saudi Arabia. Believe me, it was 1.04 cents per kilowatt hour. Depending on climate conditions, solar power can be expected to be supplied in the range of 0.8 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour by 2030. On average, solar costs will be 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Wind. The lowest onshore wind PPA in the world recently is from Texas at 1.43 cents per kilowatt hour. Onshore wind can be expected to be supplied at 1 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour in 2030, and the average is about 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Offshore wind can be expected at 4 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour in 2030. average approximation is about 5 cents per kilowatt hour. Transportation. By 2025, it is expected that electric vehicles will be cheaper to buy, operate and maintain than cars based on internal combustion engines. Many car manufacturers are therefore moving into EVs. General Motors will only produce EVs after 2035 and Honda after 2040. TNT depends for its vehicles on imports, so it will be difficult to purchase ICE cars after 2040. A significant expansion in electricity generation capacity will be required to support TNT's transportation sector by 2050. Other international developments, very important. The European Union is working on a carbon border adjustment mechanism whereby duties will be charged on products categorized under carbon leakage. If CBAM policies become widespread among OECD and other countries, the export of gas-based industry products from TNT may be negatively affected. TNT gas-based export products will be taxed on imports under the CBAM concept by various countries. I'd like to add, Venezuela will normalize, we believe, and joint development of transborder gas fields will be possible. And we also believe that Iran will become an important oil and LNG exporter. Nations such as France, Denmark, and New Zealand are following the roadmap scenario and are no longer offering new acreage for oil and gas exploration. In contrast, during 2020 and 2021, there were bid rounds held on new contracts signed in the UK, Norway, Suriname, Austria, Australia, various states, and the federal government of the United States, United Arab Emirates, Russia, China, and several African and South American countries. Nigeria is about to pass the Petroleum Industry Bill with the precise objective of accelerating oil and gas production. Colombia just launched its 2021 video. So there's an acceleration of oil and gas exploration in the world. Acceleration will ensure that any nation with hydrocarbon resources benefits to the maximum extent possible from remaining oil and gas potential before it is too late. The IEA acknowledges that their recommendations will have devastating consequences for oil and gas producer economies, which are likely to struggle to finance essential spending at current levels. This could have knock-on effects for social stability. A worldwide strategy to combat climate change will impact very negatively on nations such as Trinidad and Tobago. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it seems justified that focus is primarily placed on saving one's nation first before trying to save the world. The overall transition process should be based on placing the nation in the strongest possible economic position once the world achieves net zero carbon conditions. Net zero date for TNT. We believe the oil and gas resources of TNT is expected to be largely exhausted by the year 2060. The world can be expected to buy only green or blue ammonia and methanol at that time. Therefore, it will not be a heroic policy to join China and Brazil in targeting 2060 as the year for achieving net zero carbon emissions. So our recommendation is TNT officially adopt 2060 as a net zero target date. If TNT were to establish its position during the United Nations COP26 meeting, this definition will give substantial guidance to the overall transition policies that TNT may institute. Let us now look at the oil and gas resources of Trinidad and Tobago. Ryder Scott proves reserves of natural gas as 10.7 TCF, probable 6.8 TCF, possible 6.0 TCF. In 2025, we believe the cross-border fields loan humanity with Venezuela on the TNT side can be developed by Shell as the operator. Now let us look at natural gas. We'll have a low estimate production and a high estimate production according to chart 1. High is red and blue is low. For low estimate production, we have a decline by approximately 10% per year, resulting in 2050 gas production 200 million cubic feet per day. Total cumulative natural gas production will be about 14.1 TCF by 2050. High estimate, assuming deep water field comes on stream, natural gas, an additional 500 million cubic per day. Low estimate result and the production from deep water, 700 million cubic feet per day by 2050. Total cumulative natural gas production, approximately 18.3 TCF by 2050. Oil. Netherlands Sewell and Associates. Proved reserves 220 million barrels. Probable 100 million barrels. Possible 135 million barrels. A low estimate. Let us assume no deep water oil discoveries and the yearly decline continues at 6.5%. By 2050, the total oil production in the country will be approximately 7,500 barrels of oil per day. Total cumulative oil production is approximately 257 million barrels by 2050, even though some small fields can come on stream. High estimate of production. If deep water production estimates are based on a 1-to-4 success ratio, by 2030, this scenario would add approximately 100,000 barrels of oil per day and decline towards 2050, resulting in a total oil production in the country about 55,000 barrels per day. Total cumulative oil production, approximately 880 million barrels by 2050. The head of the Energy Committee of the Russian Parliament, Pavel Zavalny, stated, everything that can be produced should be produced as long as there's still demand to sell it. Physical terms for oil and gas. The anticipated future decline of natural gas production and the huge importance of the gas-based industries for TNT make it imperative to promote the production of natural gas relentlessly. You must produce gas now. TNT needs to have a successful bid round. TNT has established a minimum royalty of 12.5% and the proposed overall cost limit of 80% for deep water. Our recommendation is for future deep water competitive bid rounds, profit gas share should be fixed at 15% because we need gas. Government take for oil and natural gas. Chart 3 shows a government income tax at 0% for 100 million barrel field, $60 barrel price, and $20 barrel cost. This chart 3 shows a number of countries with respect to government income tax take, government income take. The typical level of government take for cost price ratio of 33.3% for oil is shown in chart 3. Gas usually has a lower government take than oil, in particular, gas that is used domestically. And as such, government take of 31% for profit gas at a fixed 15% is reasonable. That is proposed TNT for gas, that which is in red. 31%. Government take ranges from 27% to 45% for typical deepwater teams. Our recommendation here is a fixed profit gas for deepwater bid round at 15%. Physical terms of oil. The main options for TNT to increase oil production are deep water, oil discoveries, and CO2 EOR. Minimum profit oil share for PSCs should not exceed 20% in deep water. It is essential to have the competitive bid round for deep water as soon as possible, and it is essential for it to be a successful bid round. Physical crude oil terms must be correctly targeted because significant licensing activity can be expected from other countries with a more attractive deep water acreage. Other themes. Proposed PSCs can be extended for a period up to 25 years from the date of commercial discovery. A PSC which starts in 2022 would terminate in 2047, and that duration is problematic. It will not be possible to have an attractive withdrawal in 2047 for the extension of PSC, with the world going to net zero by 2050. Nor will these conditions be favorable for renegotiation of the PSC. Recommendation: an automatic 10-year renewal be granted to properly complete the related production with options for further renewal. Let us look at renewable energy resources at this time. The GHI is measured as the solar capacity in kilowatt hour per year on a square meter. And the solar energy in TNT is attractive. Most of Trinidad is approximately 2,000 kilowatt per hour. The east and south coast, about 2,100. The southwest, about 2,200. TNT has a climate variation with drier months earlier in the year, but compared to other areas in the world, the solar irradiance is rather evenly spread out over the year. This compares to 2,700 kilowatt hour in the best areas in the world, such as northern Chile, yet TNT is far better than Germany, which has 1,100 kilowatt hour. Wind energy. Wind energy is measured as the wind speed in meters per second. Onshore most of Trinidad and Tobago, the wind speed is relatively poor, 4 to 5 meters per second. Some relatively small areas have wind speeds over 7 meters per second, such as the northeast tip of Tobago, and some isolated locations on the north coast of Trinidad. Also, winds are generally acceptable over 7 meters per second over the north and south coast of Trinidad and surrounding Tobago. By comparison, for the best areas in the world, such as the North Sea or offshore Aruba, have wind speeds of 10 meters per second. Renewables. From a global competitive point of view, TNT will be able to produce solar and offshore wind energy at a reasonable average cost and for any amount required for local use, providing a sound basis for energy transition. TNT will not be able to compete with some ultra-low-cost renewable countries such as Australia, Oman, Mauritania, or Chile for the large-scale production of hydrogen for exports. Let us now turn to restructuring of the power sector. Key to a nation's energy transition strategy is the restructuring of its power sector. This graph shows that TNT, among all of the countries that are here, the global electricity cost is the lowest. TNT electricity cost is the lowest. US dollars per kilowatt hour, 0.05 cents. Total installed electricity capacity of TNT is 2608 megawatts, and actual peak power demand is approximately 1,400 megawatts. Current subsidized tariffs. Tariffs for electricity vary depending on the type of customer. The TNT government currently subsidizes electricity prices, which is an effective policy of sharing the petroleum wealth with the citizens. It is, but the rates were established in 2009 and have not been adjusted since. The problem with these policies is that they result in wasteful energy use. The Regulated Industries Commission is deliberating on increases in electricity tariffs and most likely will determine such in 2021-2022. It will not be possible to economically develop the renewable sources of Trinidad and Tobago for the purpose of electricity generation against a gas price of about or just above $1 per million BTU, even assuming inefficient power plants. Renewables will primarily compete against the cost of fuel and other operation costs of already operating plants because no new installed capacity is required. The introduction of renewable energy is uneconomic in this framework and requires significant change in current policies. The long-term consequences of not developing the renewable resources could be disastrous, since the current gas-based electrical generation capacity will become useless when natural gas production becomes insufficient. The government of the Republic of TNT is aware of the need to develop renewables. An initial relationship has been entered into with Shell BP for the creation of 150 megawatts of renewable power. The intended national determined contribution under the Paris Agreement states, Trinidad and Tobago speaking, Trinidad and Tobago already produces all of its electricity from natural gas and is working towards achieving greater efficiency through combined cycle generation at all its power plants. This sector should therefore be at the edge of low carbon emissions, with renewable energy being the next stage for reducing emissions even further. It's an important statement in a worldwide context, since many countries, USA and China included, still use coal for electricity generation. The INDC shows the anticipated sequence of firstly promoting increased efficiency of power generation and then promoting renewable resources. That is a good position. Nevertheless, the national climate change policy adopted by the country does not show detail of the timeline and suggested specific measures to achieve this overall goal. Restructuring of the power sector. Step 1, simple, 3 words: stop subsidizing electricity. Step 2, apart from implementing the 130 megawatt renewable energy agreement, there is indeed no panic to rush into utility scale renewables for the following reasons. Firstly, the RIC increase in tariffs will encourage any efficiency among citizens. Secondly, higher electricity tariffs may encourage homeowners and businesses to start installing their own residential or commercial solar panels. Thirdly, the program of improving efficiency in power generation will receive a strong impetus with the increased cost of natural gas, and this is beneficial to see how moving into combined cycle generation progresses. Finally, it is expected that the cost of solar energy will further decline, and as such, nothing is economically lost by waiting for a few years. Recommendation: all power generation should be based on renewables by 2050 as part of the overall policy to achieve net zero by 2060. That is our step 3. This step is to move gradually to the objective in 3 phases as follows. The priority should be to develop utility scale solar energy from 2025 onwards, which is relatively low cost. The next phase will be the development of higher cost offshore wind energy. Finally, the development of utility scale renewable energy storage to be able to produce 100% renewable electricity on a 24/7 basis by 2050. Ladies and gentlemen, transformation of the power sector should be part of a national strategy in which the long-term interest should override possible short-term economic considerations through legislation or other means. By 2025, it should be possible to install utility-scale solar for less than 4 cents per kilowatt hour. Offshore wind will be introduced somewhere between 2030 and 2035, depending upon the results of the offshore wind survey. Major energy storage may be required from 2040 or 2045 onwards. An important development is the use of EVs as a backup for energy storage. With at least 70% of vehicles EVs by 2050, and assuming variable power tariffs, owners of EVs may find it attractive to use the vehicles for energy storage. A huge amount of R&D is presently taking place to lower cost of energy storage by 2030, such as the US Department of Energy's published roadmap called the Energy Storage Grand Challenge. With respect to utility scale long-term storage, the goal is to achieve a cost of 5 cents per kilowatt hour by 2030. Restructuring of the other sectors. We dealt with electricity. Let us look at electric vehicles. TNT has ample power generation capacity, and the incremental cost of producing electricity even based on competitive energy prices, is remarkably low. Therefore, importation of high-cost petroleum products such as gasoline and diesel will not be required. Recommendation: assuming step 1 of the national electricity policy is successful and electricity is no longer subsidized, it is recommended to promote the use of EVs through incentives, such as making the purchase and import of EVs exempt from VAT. This is happening in Norway at this time, which records a high EV usage. As the power sector moves gradually to renewable energy, the EVs will increasingly contribute to lowering carbon dioxide emissions. Recommendation: aim is to have 100% of the road transport electric by the year 2060, based on 100% renewable energy or based on hydrogen in some cases. Electric planes and taxis. Vertical Aerospace UK has pre-orders for 1,000 aircraft from American Airlines, Virgin Atlantic, and others for air taxi VAX4, a 4-person aircraft plus pilot that takes off vertically like a helicopter, but flies like a plane at 200 miles per hour over a maximum distance of 100 miles. It is totally electric and carbon-free. Air taxis seem ideal to fly between Piarco Airport and hotels or other locations on Tobago. Larger distances, hydrogen planes are now being planned, among others, by Airbus. Recommendation: VAT exemption for purchasing such electric air taxis should be introduced. Ferries based on renewables. Recommendation: converting ferries operating between TNT within 15 years to the use of renewable energy by 2035. Ferries can operate on electricity and on hydrogen. Green methanol is being considered as a possible marine fuel also. This has been done in Denmark and in California. Gas-based industries and LNG exports. The gas-based industries relate to ammonia, methanol, fertilizer, and melamine production. TNT may find it necessary to convert the production of blue ammonia depending on the development of the natural gas production, the international ammonia market, and policies of ammonia importing nations. TNT has already considerable experience in CO2 injection and storage relating to the enhanced oil recovery. As usual, we have been leaders in many areas, and one of them, which people are not aware of, is in CO2 injection. Large-scale CO2 EOR projects can be instituted in Trinidad. Even without the possibility of EOR, the injection of carbon dioxide for climate change reasons is amply possible. Definition: blue ammonia is conventional ammonia produced from byproduct carbon dioxide that has been captured and stored. Recommendation: promote blue ammonia production since there are no major technical obstacles to such a scheme. The level of LNG exports will primarily depend on the level of gas production and the future production of ammonia and methanol. Assuming current ammonia and methanol will not decline, LNG exports will terminate around 2035. Gas-based industries could be supplied with imported gas from Guyana or more likely Venezuela, depending on gas pricing and international market conditions for ammonia and methanol. Refining. Within a few years, international oil production will start to decline, and the world will have to deal with an ongoing structural overcapacity of refining operations. Without major discoveries in TNT's deepwater acreage, local oil production will continue to decline, creating an unattractive environment to rekindle recently closed refining operations. Carbon taxes. And Dr. Pedro Van Meurs, who's an economist, may wish to clarify, extend, or answer any questions that you may wish on carbon taxes. The World Bank recommends the introduction of carbon taxes as part of an overall climate change policy. The proposed legislative policy with respect to the transformation of the power sector will make the introduction of carbon taxes not necessary. If major duties under CBM policies are introduced in OECD countries with respect to the import of gas-based products from TNT, it will be better to pay carbon taxes at TNT than duties to foreign governments. Possible industries. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to move on to possible industries. Green hydrogen, very important, is produced based on renewable energy and water electrolysis. It is believed that prior to 2030, production cost of green hydrogen production can be reduced to $2 per kilogram, making production economic. Ideally, stable and low-cost renewable energy is required for this to happen. Joint development of wind and solar energy to create the maximum daily availability of renewable energy will be beneficial. Alternatively, possible cheap storage methods can be introduced for solar energy. In principle, a solar plus wind plus green hydrogen projects will be possible. TNT will have difficulty competing with the ultra-low-cost renewable countries such as Chile, Australia, Oman for large-scale hydrogen exports. TNT may be able to competitively produce green hydrogen for local use and the Caribbean market. Local use of green hydrogen in Trinidad and Tobago may be important in several sectors. Nutrien Energy is already planning to produce green hydrogen for delivery to ammonia plants. Recommendation: development of green hydrogen should be strongly promoted, preferably with tax incentives. Green ammonia. TNT's existent large ammonia industry and industries using ammonia derivatives may place it in a competitive position to migrate from a gas-based ammonia industry to a green ammonia industry. While production processes of gas-based ammonia and green ammonia are very different, associated activities such as storage and transport will be the same, allowing for commercial potential. Recommendation: development of green ammonia should be strongly promoted, preferably with tax incentives. Green ammonia. Projects are already taking place in Spain, in Denmark, and in Saudi Arabia. Green ammonia could be the key to long-term survival of the current ammonia and ammonia derivative industries in Trinidad and Tobago. Also, the life of LNG exports could be extended if green ammonia could be started during the next 10 years to replace regular ammonia production. Green methanol. The production of green methanol based on green hydrogen will also be a possibility. Methanol is a considerably cleaner fuel for marine transport than low sulfur fuel oil. Introduction of methanol in the near term is beneficial. Direct air capture of carbon dioxide, another possible industry. DAC from the air for underground storage is still somewhat of an uncertain concept. Since carbon dioxide is only a small percentage of the air, it is costly to capture and separate it. Cost estimates vary between $100 to $1,000 per ton, well in excess of current carbon tax levels. A 1 million ton CO2 plant based on DAC is planned to start in 2026 in Scotland. The question we are asked, why not in Trinidad? Because we can promote similar projects given the experience and possibilities related to CO2 underground storage in TNT. That's a recommendation. Green synthetic fuels. Assuming TNT will be able to establish commercial green hydrogen production, the next step will be to produce synthetic fuels. Particularly, synthetic jet fuel as alternative to hydrogen may be in strong demand in the future. Some initial synthetic jet fuel production has already taken place, for example, in northern Germany. Lufthansa committed to use this synthetic fuel for 5% in jet fuel consumption within 5 years. Overall economic forecast, ladies and gentlemen, we look at population growth first. The current population of TNT is about 1.39 million people, and the fertility rate is relatively low, 1.7. The population is not expected to grow strongly in the next decade and may reach 1.5 million by 2035, after which it can be expected that the population will start to decline. By 2050, the population level may be about the same as today and may drop to 1.2 million by 2070, but the average age of the population will be older. Economic growth. Given the sharp decline of the expected natural gas production and the related government revenues, it will be difficult to achieve significant economic growth per capita over the next 30 years. Pessimistic scenario. The IMF estimated TNT's 2021 GDP per capita as US $25,883. If successive governments allow the economy slide with the decline of oil and gas production, further decline in GDP is expected. For example, by 2050, it could be about 18,000 US dollars. By 2070, there could be some economic recovery, 22,000 US dollars. The citizens of TNT will be less wealthy in the year 2070 than they are today. And over time, there will have been a significant loss of jobs. Optimistic scenario. On the other hand, if successive governments will be successful in attracting large-scale investment to restructure the economy during energy transition, the GDP per capita may continue growing as follows. By 2050, US $35,000. By 2070, $56,000. The citizens of TNT will be richer than those in most European nations today, and a significant number of high-quality jobs will have been created. The implementation of successful energy transition policies, ladies and gentlemen, is therefore of huge importance for the next generations. I'll take the opportunity now to summarize the energy transition policies. The year 2060 should be adopted to achieve net zero carbon conditions in the country. By the year 2050, all power generation should be based on renewables. As the production of natural gas declines, priority should be given for use by methanol plants and cement industries. Subsidization of electricity should stop, and electricity tariffs should be adjusted upward. A national strategy for gradual transformation of the power sector should be backed up by possible legislation to overcome short-term economic considerations. The planned 130 megawatt renewables project should be continued. VAT exemption should be given for the purchase of electric vehicles and air taxis. Special tax benefits should be considered for the promotion of combined cycle gas plants. Deep water gas development should be based on a fixed gas profit share of 15%, while the minimum oil profit share should not exceed 20%. Deep water PSCs should be renewed automatically upon the termination. Preferably, a variable daily electricity tariff should be introduced to promote solar energy. A detailed survey of offshore wind should be carried out to determine licensed areas. A standby capability should be maintained with respect to CCS in case international developments require the export of blue ammonia. The development of green hydrogen and green ammonia should be strongly promoted with tax incentives. There is no need to introduce carbon taxes unless international CBAM developments make this necessary. Now, let us now turn to the energy transition table timeline based on the summary. Based on current understandings of technological developments, the following transition timeline will be a possibility for Trinidad and Tobago. 2021, the government will adopt elimination of subsidization of electricity prices. VAT exemption will be established for EVs and electric air taxis. Physical tax incentives will be provided for combined cycle gas plants and green hydrogen and green ammonia production. The initial 130 megawatt renewables will continue to be implemented. The deep water oil and gas bid round will start. Feed-in tariffs will be established for private solar generation. During COP26, TNT will commit to be net zero carbon conditions by 2060 and 100% renewables for electricity generation by 2050. 2025, TNTEC would commit to start development of 20% renewables for electricity production. Licensed areas for offshore wind will be established. 2030, TNTEC will commit to development of 40% renewables. An offshore bid round for wind energy will be held, and wind energy production will start soon afterwards. The first commitments will be made to invest in green hydrogen and green ammonia production. EVs will become 20% of the imports. The first electric air taxi will operate. Daily variable electricity tariffs will be introduced. 2035, exports of LNG will terminate, assuming gas will be used for ammonia and methanol production. Fertilizers and melamine will be produced based on green or blue ammonia to avoid CBM levies. The ferries between Trinidad and Tobago will be electric or operate on hydrogen or other renewable marine fuel. 2040, Large utility-scale renewable energy storage projects will be undertaken. TNT will commit to 70% renewables. All ammonia exports will be based on green hydrogen. EVs will be 50% of all imports. TNT will fuel large distance aircraft at Piarco Airport with locally produced hydrogen. 2045, TNT will commit to develop 100% renewables. First, large-scale DAC project will be initiated based on credits against international carbon taxes. TNT will export significant volumes of green hydrogen to Caribbean countries. 2050, all electricity production will be based on production of renewables. Gas use will be restricted to methanol plants and cement industries with some CCS offsets. EVs would consist of 70% of imports. All local air transport will be electric. TNT will start to export synthetic jet fuel. 2060, TNT will achieve net zero carbon. All imported vehicles will be EVs. All oil and gas production will stop, or alternatively, small remaining production will be offset with CCS. Cement will be based on hydrogen. TNT will be a large green ammonia exporter to world markets, and green hydrogen and synthetic fuels exported to the Caribbean. TNT will have large DAC operations. 2070, population of TNT will be 1.2 million people. As a result of the successful implementation of transition policies, GDP per capita will be US $35,000 by 2050 and US $56,000 by 2070, and many high quality jobs will be created. One may ask, what if? What if successive governments of Trinidad and Tobago do not implement an aggressive energy transition policy? What if the country sleepwalks toward the year 2050 in the mistaken belief that somehow oil and gas production will continue to support cheap electricity, substantial government budgets, and large exports of LNG, ammonia, methanol, and fertilizers? The most important conclusion of this report is that Trinidad and Tobago does not have a competitive advantage in producing renewable energy. Ultra-low cost solar and wind are available in other countries. Reasonable solar costs exist in most of the tropics and subtropics. Attractive wind conditions exist in many of the temperate zones. Large DAC projects can be created in all nations with depleted oil and gas reservoirs that absorb carbon dioxide. The methanol and cement industries will have to close for lack of natural gas. Electricity production must initiate a massive conversion to renewables at significant cost at a time the country can no longer afford it. The USA imports green ammonia and fertilizers from Puerto Rico because the USA protected this industry with CBM levies against ammonia and fertilizer imports from TNT. And therefore, the ammonia and fertilizer industries in TNT closed in the year 2040. The Dominican Republic has cornered the Caribbean green hydrogen market. Barbados is a hub for hydrogen policies for large distance aircraft. Large DAC projects have been implemented in Peru, Texas, Scotland, Iceland, Oman, and Malaysia, but not in TNT. Colombia is the main exporter of synthetic jet fuels in the region based on the excellent solar potential of La Guajira. The GDP per capita of Trinidad and Tobago is down to US $18,000. The economic prospects for 2070 are grim because the country has not established competitive industries based on renewables and has not prepared its human resource base to be successful in the net zero world. The per capita GDP in the year 2050 may be at best US $22,000, and many jobs would be lost. That is what we wake up and see. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now move in a discussion period chaired by the head of the department, Dr. Pedro Van Meers is on, he's very willing at this time to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Professor Jupiter, and also to Dr. Pedro Van Meers for this very valuable and informative presentation on suggested energy transition policy for Trinidad and Tobago the next 50 years. I would like to acknowledge the presence of our Dean for the Faculty of Engineering, Professor Edwin Ekwe. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now in our question and answer session. Please use the chat or the raise hand options if you have any questions or comments that you would like to share. So we have a question from Jason Chatur. Jason?
Hi there, folks. Dr. Van Meeuws, just a quick question. I know in the UK, with sort of CCS being developed at present apace, a lot of discussion from the government has been focused on how to protect existing brownfield industry, particularly fertilizers, petrochemicals, with regard to carbon offshoring. So, of course, the UK sort of falls under the EU ETS scheme. And the concept is, as carbon taxation increases, those carbon taxes could be offset to pay for your CCS costs. And the industries, the strong message from industry is saying, if carbon taxes increase, they're going to have to shutter and move to jurisdiction without carbon taxation. Have you seen examples where governments have been able to sort of implement carbon taxation without this sort of massive carbon offshoring going on?
Yes, there are quite a number of nations. About 40 nations in the world have already introduced carbon taxes. In some nations have been very intensive, or jurisdictions. British Columbia, for instance, in Canada, has had carbon taxes, quite significant carbon taxes now already for the last 10 years. And they haven't seen any major shift in industries. In fact, and they have seen a significant lowering of CO2 emissions. So there are examples of, kind of successful introduction of carbon taxes. My feeling is that in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, since you have already a fully gas power sector, and since your vehicles are going to be imported anyway, the whole rationale for carbon taxes may not be as strong as in other nations, and you may therefore simply continue to rely on the kind of energy policies that we are suggesting. But there is no question that if import duties, carbon tax protecting import duties are implemented in the United States or in Europe, then you would definitely be better off to tax your own industries as well, because otherwise you just end up paying duties in other nations in the world. However, I think given the fact that your electricity sector is very well defined and doesn't need kind of particular incentive other than a coherent government policy, I think you may wish to be careful with carbon taxes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pedro Meeuws. And we have another question from Natalie Hussein. Very informative and interesting talk. Has there been any progress made on the use of biogas as a renewable energy source?
Sorry, what kind of renewable energy source?
Biogas.
Oh, biogas, yes. Yes, you want me to answer that question?
Yes, please.
Yes, yeah, biogas is definitely considered a very important renewable contributor, particularly in the context of urban waste disposal and so on. Biogas is an important contributor. In fact, the plan is to run Heathrow Airport on biogas, for instance. So it is definitely an important possible contributor. However, I do believe that the main sources of renewable energy will remain solar and wind.
Thank you very much. And this question is for Professor Andrew Jupiter. In your presentation, you recommended a fixed gas profit of 15% for deep water PSCs. Can you explain if this is a new approach?
Thank you very much for that question. Before I answer the question, I want to say how I'm very pleased that Professor Pedro van Meurs is with us here this evening. Dr. Pedro van Meurs, I think he should be a professor of practice. In the context that he's no stranger to our country, he was here in the 1990s when we put together the model production sharing contract with the World Bank. He has been in this country for many years, working with us in the area of physical matters, oil and gas. And I have been associated with him in various areas for the last 26 years. So I want to pay special thanks for Pedro joining me here this evening as we celebrate 50 years in the oil industry. To answer your question is that Trinidad and Tobago is well known for its progressive production sharing contracts in the context that as gas prices increase, government take increases. Similarly, as oil prices increase, government take also increases. That goes the same way with production. It's a matrix. And we have been heralded internationally for the manner in which we have dealt with it. As production increases, government take increases on both oil and gas. And it has worked very well. We have now arrived at a very uncertain time in the history of oil and gas. You heard about the STEPS report and the roadmap report. Therefore, our approach to PSCs must be a bit different. We already have 12.5% for royalty for gas, that's 12.5%. And we are introducing for the first time, suggesting a fixed 15% for profit gas. Why? It's because we need oil production, gas production at this time. That will give us 31% of government take, which will ensure that companies will bid for deep water gas. Revenue stream was a driving force before. It's still a driving force. But what is important, if we do not get a good, very good bid round for gas in deep water, we'll not be able to get it again. As I shared with you, what is happening with so many countries, about 13 countries involved in bid round and deep bid round now, in the area of ensuring that they accelerate the oil production and gas production. We are fixing it at 15%. So there'll be more players who will be bidding. It will be more attractive. And probably more important is that if we do find gas, we will be able to produce that gas, bring it on stream, continue with our LNG period for a particular time, and ensure that our industries at point leases can survive because we'll have control within our territorial waters what to do with our gas. That's the reason. It's strictly ensuring that we have a good bid round, people bid, and if you find gas, you produce it. And we'll still have a government take of about 31%.
Thank you very much, Professor Jupiter, for that answer. And there's a question here from Sean. Any idea on the price of hydrogen in the global market? And how will this potentially compare to hydrogen price from a local facility?
Yes, I can maybe answer that. The current prices for currently hydrogen is produced directly from natural gas. And it is an energy very inefficient process and results in a lot of CO2. And that is why the world wants to move towards green hydrogen. Nevertheless, the cost of production are anywhere between $1.50 and $2 per kilogram. So that means that if we want to be competitive with green hydrogen or blue hydrogen, we definitely have to beat the price of $2 per kilogram. Pretty well all of the current research, many R&D grants in the US, in Europe, they are very much oriented to try to produce hydrogen by 2030 at $2 or less. And many people, not people, companies are investing currently billions of dollars to try to achieve that goal. It is also very much a matter of scaling up the green hydrogen production. But, you know, it is all a matter of speculation still, how cheap we can produce it. But in general, most experts now believe that it will be possible to produce green hydrogen by 2030 or earlier at less than $2 per kilogram. And that would make it completely competitive with this current hydrogen production from fossil fuels.
Thank you very much, Professor. And there's another question here from Dr. Kieran Ward. Thanks for the interesting presentation. In your opinion, how do you see bioenergy and bioenergy with CCS contributing to the energy supply chain locally, particularly looking at net negative life cycle GHG emissions?
Yes, the locals, of course, theoretically, the ideal way to create negative carbon emissions is to use forest or agricultural waste products, then produce electricity, and then strip off the CO2 and re-inject it. Because now you have the trees capturing the CO2, then you burn the trees, but you put the CO2 in the ground. And that then results in total in actually extracting the CO2 from the air and putting it in the ground, which means a negative carbon cycle. And it is general belief that that is a very important component of a possible 250 scenario of zero energy. Nevertheless, the problem with Trinidad and Tobago is you no longer have the very large agricultural export industries that produce a lot of byproducts, bio byproducts. Nor would it be very ideal to start a large forestry industry in Trinidad and Tobago. So I think Trinidad and Tobago is not necessarily the ideal place for such industries. But I mean, on a large scale. On a small scale, yes, possibly, particularly in combination with urban waste removal.
Thank you very much, Professor. And there's a question here for Professor Jupiter from Navin. Is EOR commercially viable in Trinidad? If so, what is holding us back?
Thank you very much for that question, Navin. The answer to that is yes, I believe it is. EOR has been commercially viable for many years for heavy oil as such, through steam. I think your question may be related directly to carbon dioxide as such. And I think what is very important now, and there's a committee that is working on it, a committee that is chaired by the Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy, on a cabinet appointed committee, in fact, in which is really looking in the area of large scale EOR. We have the CO2. So we need to find out how can we get this CO2 to reservoirs. As a senior person in the oil industry stated recently, who is involved in CO2 EOR, there's no need for a pilot project. The CO2 is readily available. Some reservoirs have already been studied, and therefore you need to transport the CO2, maybe from Atlantic LNG, maybe from Point Lisas, to get to the fields. So what I'm saying to you to answer your question is that the ingredients are there for a large-scale CO2 project. It's important for us now to work out the economics in order to get it done. It's taken a bit too long. I think we can get it done.
So thank you, Professor Jupiter. Another question. If we have significant, and this is from Kevin, if we have significant new resources discovered after this bid round, that would take us to 2060, albeit at reduced commodity prices, due to reduced demand because of increased renewables and green infrastructure. So the question is, what happens if we have significant new resources discovered after this bid round that would take us to the 2060 at reduced commodity prices due to reduced demand because of increased renewables and green infrastructure?
Thank you, Kevin, for that question. And that is identically what we are saying in the following context. You need gas. If you find success, you'll have about 500 million cubic feet per day additional. If you do not find gas, by 2050, you will be already down to 200 million cubic feet per day. That means that you will not be able to have enough gas for your Point Lisas area because it's a transition. It's a transition we are showing. As you build your green hydrogen, as you build green ammonia, as you build blue ammonia also, you need to have activity in LNG. The point I was making that LNG can continue longer if it is that you are able to get it right with green ammonia, green methanol also. Why? It's because as your production declines by 10%, you will see where you will be in 2050, 2060. By 2060, even though you have 500 million cubic feet per day, additional may be coming from offshore, and you have to look at the price, deep water. What you are seeing is a decline. And as you decline, you will prioritize the use of a natural gas. While you go green in ammonia and green in methanol, you will find that you will still need some gas for cement. You will still need some gas for LNG. And therefore, you will be in a stronger position as a nation economically if you are in that position, because you will still get some revenues from LNG until it stops. That's the reason why you must accelerate your bid round for gas, so that you'll have additional gas to be able to continue the operations that will need gas.
Thank you very much, Professor Jupiter. And we have Jason who would like to ask a question. Jason?
Thank you. I just wanted to reflect on what the professor mentioned about the electricity market reform. And I think that's critical for the nation to tackle right now. I guess just more of a reflection than a question, really. As you increase the amount of renewables on our electricity grid, of course, the cost of that grid sort of goes up exponentially with the need to reinforce the grid, especially with the sort of decentralized structure that sort of renewables tends to follow. Has that additional cost of the grid been factored in addition to the actual CapEx and OpEx of the solar and wind? I guess that's one. And just sort of picking up on Marcia's point in the chat as well, in terms of land usage in Trinidad. decentralized sort of small scale solar may work better than sort of large footprint industrial grade solar projects as well. So just two reflections really.
Yes, I guess that was a comment, yes.
I guess so. Has the cost to the additional cost to the grid been sort of factored into the roadmap put forward?
Sorry. The thing is this, that we are going to need, a significant expansion of power generation just to fuel the EVs that necessarily are going to be imported in Trinidad and Tobago. You have already a very significant overcapacity of electricity. And that is actually the problem in creating new renewable energy. In many nations, renewable energy, electricity is created because people need new energy and new electricity, and consequently they need to build new plants. And if you have to build a new plant anyway, then solar is now, and wind is now significantly cheaper. This means that in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, with a large existing capacity already there, you actually have to compete on operating cost. And that, of course, is far more difficult. And that is why the electricity pricing is so important. Now, you are entirely correct. A large expansion of electricity, renewable electricity generation and demand will probably require an expansion of the grid. Some decentralized production of renewables will probably mitigate some of that expansion cost. But yes, there is a need for expansion of the grid. However, that will be necessary because of the significant increase in electric vehicles that can be expected. The country has no option by 2035 or 2040. You can only import most likely electric vehicles. So your electric grid has to be prepared for that. You have the capacity, but you will probably need to reinforce your distribution grid for sure. We didn't make calculations of the cost that would entail, but that is for sure an additional cost that will be required.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And one last question from Devendra Chattergood. While I understand the drive to move away from fossil fuels, what is the projection for alternative employment for persons who no longer have jobs in oil and gas at some point in the future, based on the timeline presented by Professor Jupiter?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Start, Petro. I'll end. Can you start? Yeah. You can go ahead, Petro.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, the detailed calculation of employment is always difficult. But as you very well know, the oil industry and the large ammonia industries are not a very heavy employer by definition. The solar energy, solar construction, and wind energy is believed to create very significant employment and high quality employment. So consequently, the creation of renewable energy is definitely an employment generator, as in the current US policies. Actually, the whole focus of the current US policy is actually job creation. in moving into renewable energy, because it is such an important, are such important jobs, and it are high quality jobs. Now, will there be, as oil and gas declines, will there be a decline of employment in the oil and gas industry? Of course. And that is why it is so important to create the new jobs, so that there will be more jobs in the coming decades rather than less jobs.
I just want to add, thank you for that question, and thank you, Pedro, for that answer. I just want to add, later in our, please do not go away, because we will be, our head of department will be sharing with you plans that UWI putting forward now to ensure that we are able to furnish the industry with the correct type of disciplines as such. And you will note that I just want to say with jobs that you can build on the base, on the petroleum industry base, on what we have. I'm talking about the persons who work in the petroleum industry now. You can build on that because of the discipline. You will see a lot of people in the petroleum industry they are able to move to other disciplines based on their basic foundation. You'll hear a little bit about that later. What I'm trying to say to you is that yes, jobs will be affected, but we did not do a calculation in Trinidad and Tobago. That's another study, how many jobs will be created. But I understand that from what Dr. Pedro stated, from his experience, that a number of new jobs will be created in the renewable sector. But I think that it's an area, more work should be done in Trinidad to determine job creation. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you very, very much for this presentation.